this morning is from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, and then again 9 through 12. I'm going to make it 13. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of the people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Verses 9 through 13. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came into his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. Praise God for the word of God for everyone.
Praise be God.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We'll be singing a new piece called Spirit Shine on Us.
morning is from the second chapter of Matthew, starting in verse 13 to the end of that chapter. When the three kings, the Magi, had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said. "Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so is fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old or under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who are trying to take the child's life are dead." So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee and went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, "He will be called a Nazarene." My friends, the word of God for us, the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Well, a young boy was on his way to elementary school one day when he stopped to watch a long freight train go rumbling by. And because of that, he was late to school. So he was punished for his tardiness. Later that same day, the boy realized that he had left his homework at home again. So his teacher punished him for that. He had lunch, and then after lunch during recess, the boy began to feel a little queasy, a little ill in his stomach. So he ran back into school to go see the school nurse. And as he did, he tripped and he fell, and he broke his arm. But while he's lying on the ground, he found a quarter. So in the car, on the way to the doctor's office, or from the doctor's office, the boy turned to his parents and said, "You know, this is the best day of my life. I've never found a quarter before." So, what are you thankful for this morning? In our prayers, we've talked about a number of people who are ill, who are ailing. One of the realities of the Christmas season is that for many people it turns into a time of illness or injury or even of death. So what are we thankful for on this first Sunday in January, this first Sunday of a new year? We all know that the last Thursday in November has been recognized as Thanksgiving Day since the days of Abraham Lincoln. But I'd like to suggest that maybe we ought to make December 31st, the last day of each year, a day of Thanksgiving. Now, we typically don't think of December 31st that way. We tend to think of it as a day to look forward, to look into the new year that's just about ready to begin. But December 31st is also an excellent time to stop and remember all that has happened during the year that's coming to an end. And to give thanks to God for all the blessings that we have received over the past 12 months. That word, remember, is an important one in the Bible. Before the Hebrew people crossed over the Jordan River into the Promised Land, Moses commanded them to remember who was giving them the land in the first place. Before Jesus died on the cross, he broke bread with his disciples one last time, and he said, "Do this in remembrance of me." So as you think back and remember, Maybe 2019 was not a good year for you. Perhaps you dealt with illness or financial troubles or maybe even the death of a loved one. The truth of life is that God does not always give us good things. Yet I will argue that there is always going to be something that we can be thankful for, just like the young boy we heard about a few minutes ago, who was punished, was sick, broke his arm, and was ecstatic as he found a quarter. In today's world, all of us could benefit from cultivating this young man's spirit. We need to remember that good things of life and be thankful instead of constantly dwelling on the bad things and being resentful. But unfortunately, that's awfully hard to do in the world we live in, especially when a year is coming to an end. So if you went back and looked at the newspapers from those last few days of 2019, there's going to be news in there about the bombing death of one of Iran's top military leaders, the chaos that's in Washington, unrest in Hong Kong, the shooting that occurred at the church in Texas, hate crimes, local traffic accidents, drunk drivers, people being killed in house fires. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on and on. For many people, the joy of Christmas is quickly turning over to pain and sorrow. And that's very true of our gospel lesson this morning. Last Sunday, Tom shared with you the story of the three magi, the coming of the kings to worship the baby Jesus. It's a wonderful story. It's a story about celebrating the birth of a child who would be the king. It's also a wonderful story about King Herod being foiled in his attempts to find out where the child was. But in a very short few verses in this passage from Matthew, we go from that joyous story of the Nativity to the cruel account of King Herod's program to murder, yes, murder, all of Bethlehem's infant sons. Today we call this event the slaughter of the innocents. We have no way of knowing how many children died that year, 25, 30, maybe more. And why? Why did this have to happen? King Herod was a unique individual. He was obsessed with being in power. He was in power only because the Romans had appointed him. And he was obsessed with wanting to keep that position. He felt the need to eliminate any real or potential pretender to the throne that he could find. He was so afraid of being overthrown during his lifetime that he had several family members put to death, including his first wife and 3 of his own sons. All this to ensure there would be no rivals for the throne. When you go to Israel today, you can visit a number of castles that King Herod built over the course of his lifetime. And at first it would appear to be that he was some magnificent building builder. But he did this as part of his obsession about being overthrown. He would never stay at the same palace for more than a couple of months at a time. He and his entourage were constantly moving from one location to another, afraid that if he stayed too long in one place, the local forces would get him. This is a gruesome story. It really is. Matthew wants us to understand the depth of Herod's evil nature. But more importantly, Matthew wants us to understand and comprehend God's ability to overcome even these kinds of sinful and evil actions. I think it's really important to notice in today's lesson that Joseph, Jesus' father, responds immediately when the angel appears to him and gives him some direction from God. There are no responses like, let me think about it, or I'll get back to you on that, or that's not what my neighbor says happened. Instead, Joseph demonstrates 3 critical characteristics of authentic faith as he leads the Holy Family to safety. The first is the point we've made earlier. Joseph has the faith to act promptly when God commands him to leave Judea. When Joseph is warned by an angel in his second divine dream, he doesn't decide to sleep on it. He doesn't consult the experts. He doesn't check out his horoscope. Instead, Matthew says that Joseph gathers up his family during the night, that same day, that same 24-hour period, and he sets out for safety of Egypt. Now, let's be clear about what's being said here. Joseph does not say to Mary, pack an overnight bag, honey, because we're going to Cape Cod for the weekend. This is more like, grab what you can, Mary. We've got to flee for our lives to Egypt, and I have no earthly idea when we're going to be able to come home. Ultimately, faith in God means not delaying when God calls us to action. And once we understand what God wants us to do, our response should always be to say, yes. Yet history is full of examples to demonstrate what happens when people procrastinate. I've shared with you before that I have long been a student of history. And so I will share with you one example from the American Civil War. Right after the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederate forces under General Lee began a rapid but controlled retreat south back over the Potomac River into Virginia and into safety. But when they came to the Potomac River, Lee did not have the ability to take his entire army over at the same time. So he decided to split his army in half. And so for several days he had part of his army on the southern part of the river and part on the northern side, which meant that the part on the northern side was very vulnerable to being attacked. Now, General Meade was the Union commander. He was not a decisive man. Even though he had many more troops than Lee had altogether, much less many more troops than those that were stranded, if you will, on the north side of the river, Meade decided to stop and study the situation. He delayed and he studied. He delayed and he pondered. He delayed and he consulted with his staff. And by the time he got ready to take some action, Lee had managed to bring all of his army safely over the river and back into Virginia. And an opportunity to perhaps have ended the Civil War almost a year earlier was lost. We're called to not be like General Meade, but we're called to respond promptly to God's directions in our lives. The second characteristic, people of faith are called to be obedient. Twice now in the first two chapters of Matthew, we learn about Joseph receiving a divinely inspired dream, visited by an angel. And each time he is given very specific instructions, and each time he obeys God's commandments to the word, to the letter. It would have been so easy for Joseph and Mary to have chosen a different location to run to. Another part of Israel, perhaps, where they had family, friends, where they knew people, where they would have been comfortable. They probably didn't want to go to this distant and foreign land like Egypt that had its own language, its own custom, where they would have been aliens, where they would have been outsiders. But Joseph does not object. He does not question God's plans. He doesn't try to adapt them to suit his own way of thinking. Since God has told Joseph to go to Egypt, that's what the Holy Family will do. I wonder how often we miss God's best desires for us when we try to second guess God's will. Faithful obedience protects us from unknown dangers that may be lurking in our lives. And faithful obedience leads us into new and exciting possibilities that we never would have imagined possible. The third characteristic, faith, requires that we act out of trust. And if the truth be known, this is the hardest aspect of all. It took complete trust on Joseph's part to gather his family up as quickly as he did and travel south into Egypt. But it took even greater trust to return to Galilee several years later. When the angel appeared to Joseph now a third time and gave him the all-clear sign, instructing him to go now to Nazareth, there had to have been questions in Joseph's mind. It's quite possible that he and Mary were quite comfortable in Egypt. Some of the writings that would have been contemporaneous with that time period suggest that Joseph may even have made a very successful career for himself as a master carpenter while they were in Egypt. How could they really know that things were going to be safe back home? He didn't have the advantage of CNN and Fox News. The message, the information coming back and forth would have been very marginal at best. So he's trusting this angel, trusting God, that things indeed are going to be okay. And yet trust God he does. And they set out and travel north to Galilee. I wonder if you've ever been in that kind of a situation, if you've ever sensed that God was calling you to take some gigantic step, to do some truly awesome task that seemed impossible. Have you ever felt God calling you to do something truly outlandish, something dangerous, something outside your comfort zone, something that involves personal risk? I have. When God called me to be a minister, I thought God was crazy. There were still days when I wonder about that. It took me 5 years to finally buy into what God was trying to get me to do. Whether we want to admit it or not, some of the most exciting things, though, that will ever happen in our lives are the result of God asking us to walk where we have never wanted to walk before. To walk where we cannot see what lies ahead. To walk where we know there are going to be difficult challenges or perhaps even danger. But we walk just the same, understanding that it's God's job to see what lies around the bend. And it's our job to trust. During the last few months of World War II, as the American troops were crossing Germany, heading towards Berlin, U.S. soldiers would very patiently and carefully stop and look in every farmhouse, every building that they would encounter to see if there might be any German soldiers hiding there. And one day the story is told about a squad of U.S. soldiers who came upon an abandoned house. They started on the ground floor, they went upstairs, and eventually went downstairs into the basement. And there on the crumbling wall of a hidden room, they found where a victim of the Jewish Holocaust had scratched a Star of David in the wall of the room and left a powerful message. I believe in the sun, even when it does not shine. I believe in love, even when it is not shown. And I believe in God, even when he does not speak. As you think about your resolutions for the year 2020, I hope that you'll consider being like Joseph and stepping out in faith. A faith that would be characterized by promptness, by obedience, and especially by trust. If you do, I believe there are no limits to what God can accomplish with you and through you. With us and through us. What a wonderful way that would be to spend this year to come. Thanks be to God.